Hello, everyone. This is Ross Carpri again with Keller Williams in Vestavia. Now, we're coming to you live today, and excuse me, I've got Andy Gagliano on the line with me as well. And Andy, I think before the call we talked about a few things we were going to cover today. So
yeah,
I'm going to let you get started with that, and then we'll get into it.
months. In fact, I want to say that this has happened almost every single month of 2025, and that is that the number of transactions, real estate transactions, meaning a buyer puts an offer on a property, that offer is accepted, and then after it's accepted, at some point, that transaction falls apart. So the number of real estate transactions falling apart each month tends to be or is growing, it's increasing. And so this past month in December of 2025, that number was 16% and some change. I think 16.3%.
That's a lot.
Something like that. That's a lot of transactions. And you know, I see obviously transactions that fall apart, and I have, I see why they fall apart. I don't necessarily get into a lot of the dirty details, but if a deal falls apart, the real estate agent will say to me, "Hey, this deal fell apart. The buyers and sellers couldn't agree on X."
Right.
And so, but I want to know from your point of view, when these transactions fall apart, is there something, or are there some things that you as a realtor, or a buyer who has a good realtor, a seller who has a good realtor, are there some things that a realtor can do to help keep these deals together? Now, I think it's important to say this because I know in my 30 plus years of being in the business, I've dealt with a lot of consumers, a lot of home buyers. And some home buyers just have this, they're always going to have a negative opinion of real estate agents. They probably have a negative opinion of mortgage people too, and that's fine. But I think it's important to stress that realtors who are keeping their clients' best interest at heart and top of mind are not keeping a deal together to try to save a commission. They're keeping a deal together because that buyer wanted to buy that house at one point in time, and that seller wants to sell the house. So if those wants and those needs align, then obviously as a real estate agent and as a buyer and a seller, you want that transaction to happen. So I think that's a little caveat that needs to be thrown out there first, but I want to throw that question back out there to you again. Is there something as a real estate agent, or some things as a real estate agent, that you can do to help keep a deal together that is on the ropes? And why do a lot of those deals even fall apart to start with?
Well, it's a great question. There's a lot of avenues to that question.
You
You
froze a little bit on me there, Ross.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Start over.
There are a lot of avenues that the mortgage or the loan, a lot of paths it has to take. Mm-hmm. Now, to begin with, one of the main reasons that I see a lot of deals fall apart is when you get to the inspection. Most buyers, I try to educate my buyers to look at the inspection report and pick out the things that are hazardous incidences, mold, electrical, plumbing, major things that they don't want to have to deal with and shouldn't have to deal with.
Structural
issues. And there are a lot of things that the buyer may request in their repair addendum that the seller maybe is not wanting to do or wanting to spend the money, or there's all kinds of variables. And what makes it hard for us is we try to set the expectations for the buyer to ask for things that they feel are important. Now, a lot of buyers want it all. This is the report my inspector said,
Yeah.
and I want everything fixed. It could be a broken face plate on an electrical outlet. It could be bulbs burned out in a light fixture. And to you and I, it's just like, okay, it's no big deal. Replace the bulb. But to a buyer, they're thinking, well, maybe is there an electrical problem why that light's burned out, or is it just the bulb?
Right.
Or are they having a problem with power or electricity, or there's all kinds of variables.
Yeah.
What we try to do is steer them. Okay, here's your inspection report. This is what we feel like are basic needs that would make you happy as a buyer to have these things repaired. That's one side of the equation. Then you have to go to the seller and say, okay, this is what we would like to have repaired, and this is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Most of the time, a seller will look at that and think, that's legitimate. I've been having problems with that light switch or that breaker or whatever. And I don't have a problem with getting all that fixed. And when that happens and they agree to do the repairs based on the way it's written, we're fine in most cases.
Yeah.
What goes awry is when the buyer makes a request, seller doesn't want to do it for either they don't feel it's important to them, they don't want to spend the money, they don't have anybody that can fix it without costing a fortune. Those are things that make the seller say, you know what, I'm not going to fix any of that. Well, here's the problem. The buyer says, well, I'm not buying the house. So you have to start all over again and go to another property. That's one reason. Another reason is when they agree to pay for the price of a house in the contract, they have the lender appraise it. The property doesn't appraise for whatever reason. Maybe they overshot the value. And, instead of the seller saying, well, you know what, it's probably a little high, but I think the appraisal amount, I can live with that. And then those deals work out. But then you also have times where the seller says, well, I'm not doing that because my neighbor down the street got $100,000 more than mine's worth. And I'm
Right.
not going to pay that. So
Yeah.
then you got that hurdle. So, and then on top of that, you have issues sometimes with surveys. Most of the times, I'm going to say probably 8 or 9 out of 10, the survey comes back fine. Every now and then, you might come upon an issue where there's an encroachment from the next door neighbor. Maybe the fence post is on their property or issues like that. And people are very funny about their property. Like, well, I'm not going to pay for that property if he's on my side, and all that. So you run into that kind of hurdle. So see, there's just so many different things that can go awry. And what we try to do is to educate both our seller and our buyer on how we feel this should be handled. Most of the time you got to remember that when you have a contract on a house, the basic bottom line is we as agents have gotten the both parties, the seller and the buyer, to have a meeting of the minds to sell the property and to buy the property, which means that one has to there's a give and take on both sides. And where the problem comes in is when the buyer wants the seller to give more, or the seller wants the buyer to take more. I mean, everybody has to agree. And
Right.
sometimes that's not always the case. A lot of it depends on the reason for selling. If they feel like I've got to get out of this house no matter what, they'll fix things and just so they can get the bottom line accomplished by selling the house. But then there's other cases where they're not. I'm not doing that. I don't care how much it costs me. I'm not fixing that. Well, and then that's when you run into the problems. That's just from the inspection part of it. Now, when you get into when I get into it with my buyers on the purchase, I always try to verify with the lender. Try to do it maybe weekly. It depends on how far we are in the process, but do you see any problems? Is everything looking good on the uh, credit report for you. Is there any red flags? Are there any things that I need to discuss with the buyer that they may need to point out to you? Is there anything showing up on the credit report? So we don't just sit around and write an offer and then just sit back and have a cup of coffee until it closes. That's just not what happens. We're constantly working it. We're constantly calling people. We're constantly getting payoff information if you're a seller. We're constantly checking to see if there are any liens on the property if you're a seller. So there's a lot of things that we do behind the scenes that people don't know about. What a lot of people tell me, or I've seen people tell me, is, man, oh man, oh man, you just sat there during the whole closing and got a big check. But that's not what that's the bottom line, but that's not what caused me to get there.
Right.
When you can get there smoothly and you can buy a house without pressure, without obstacles, without issues, then I know for a fact that the realtors have done their work. And people don't see that behind the scenes. That's the problem. So there's a lot of things that can cause them to fall apart, but we try to monitor it as it goes along to help and prevent anything that might happen in the future.
Yeah. Now, I think it's important to know as a buyer, well, and a seller too, that if there's something major that shows on a home inspection, there are very few buyers out on the market at any given point in time who will overlook something major, because they may want to buy the property and may not care that the HVAC needs to be replaced in the next 6 months or next year, but they may not have the money to pay it out of pocket. So they want the seller to do that, and so that they're not paying that money out of pocket because they can't do it.
Right.
And so, I think it's important for both buyers and sellers to know that a lot of times this is not just a competition where one party in the transaction is trying to get the upper hand over the other.
Right.
A lot of times it comes down to money. And I mean, let's face it, if you got the money to do it, great. But a lot of people don't have the money right now to put into fixing up a house that they need to sell.
Right.
And a lot of people don't have the money to put into a house that to fix up that they're buying either.
Right.
And so, but I think a lot of people lose sight, and it becomes a personal thing.
Sure.
To them, whereas it's not. 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.5 times out of 10, it's not personal. It's business/financial.
Right. And it becomes personal though. And when it gets to that point, then you're almost at an impasse.
Yeah.
Because then the buyer says, well, I'm not fixing that. I'm not buying this house if it needs an air conditioning unit.
Mm-hmm.
And the seller is saying, well, I'm not going to sell it to you. I'm not going to replace the air conditioning unit because it works fine. Okay, it's old. We understand that. That's normal wear and tear. We have it serviced every year. I've got a company. I've got documentation saying we have everything checked. Everything works fine. Okay, if it breaks 2 or 3 years down the road, that's kind of the way it is. We can't guarantee once a house closes that the air is going to work for 10 years.
Right.
I mean, there's no guarantee. So you have to kind of work those things out. But that's when it becomes a personal issue for both buyer and seller, that's when the problems seem to start.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to give in. And that's how it kind of plays out. But another thing to think about too, I know friends of mine that have purchased homes for their kids or whatever, and they may be a contractor. Well, to a contractor, they don't really care anything about the condition of the property unless it's a structural issue.
Yeah.
Okay. Because, it needs an air conditioning unit. I can get you one for cost. If it needs painting, I got painters to paint it for you. So, people work around those depending on the situation and the issue. But your normal everyday buyer and seller get to a point where, gosh, I don't want to buy a house and have to replace the air conditioning unit and in 10 years or 5 years, let's just say. But you can't base it on that, because that error could go longer than 5 years.
Right.
You don't have to do it at all. So, and even if something does break, a lot of times it can be fixed without having to replace the unit. Could be a capacitor, could be compressor, something way cheaper than an entire unit.
Yeah.
So there's so many variables. And again, what we try to do is to make sure that everybody understands this is what we need to do to get the house sold. And it's not about the commission. We're just trying to keep it afloat so that it will close.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, one thing that I see from time to time, and I've had this cause deals to fall apart, is there seems to be a trend in the mortgage industry right now, especially with a lot of larger lenders, whether that's online lenders or bigger banks or whoever it happens to be,
Mm-hmm.
where they're not taking the time with the buyer up front to set the expectations of what that mortgage payment and what those closing costs are going to look like when the deal is done.
Right.
And that, a lot of times that can bust a budget for a buyer.
Sure.
And if it busts the buyer's budget, then the buyer's out of there. They're not going to close on that property. And so sometimes that can cause a deal to fall apart. So, I think it's important that buyers stress to the mortgage loan officer that they're working with, whether that is an online lender or a big bank or a small company like Gagliano Mortgage, and to say to them, hey, send me an estimate. And that's one thing that we really try to do on every transaction before an offer is made. I want the buyer to know how much money they can expect to pay out of pocket at closing.
Sure.
Now, that's an estimate. We don't know what that number is going to look like usually until a day or two before closing, the final number. But I can generally get you pretty close on an estimate. And then number two, with the monthly payment. And I think a lot of the bigger lenders are so worried about, hey, I need to get off the phone with this buyer, and I need to get on the phone with the next buyer that calls in that wants a loan because I need a paycheck next month too.
Sure.
And so they'll never send an estimate to tell that buyer what their monthly payment will be. But on top of that, if they do send one, a lot of times they won't take the extra 60 seconds that it takes them to get onto the county tax assessor's website to see what the real property taxes are on that property.
Right. Right.
And, I can say we try to do that on every single deal that we send an estimate out on, because you could take two houses sitting side by side in the same neighborhood, and the property taxes on those two properties can vary by a great deal. Property A, the property taxes might be double what the taxes are on the house right next door to them.
Right. Right.
And so if you're looking at that house that has double taxes, then that's going to affect your monthly payment for a period of time.
Sure.
And so we try to make sure our buyers have all.
Okay, you froze up, Andy.
Money they're going to expect to pay.
Yeah,
Did I
you froze
freeze?
up. Yeah.
Okay. So when a buyer puts an offer on a property, they know how much that monthly payment's going to be. They know how much they can expect to pay at closing. And I think that's important because, a lot of times those buyers don't find that out with these bigger companies until they get into the process after they put a property under contract.
Right. And that's just kind of like being on a limb. And see, we as agents, that's one of the responsibilities we have. When we write an offer, we give you an estimate of closing costs. Now, again, that estimate is just that, an estimate. It's not down to the penny. It's not finalized, but it does give them an idea. This is about how much you're going to need, and based on what you're going to finance, this is about how much your house note's going to be.
Yeah.
You as lenders verify that for us, and then of course at the very end, when all the figures come in, that really is a true picture of what your closing costs are. But that, by law, we're required to give a net sheet based on the purchase. The same for sellers. If we get an offer in on a property that we have listed, then we have to give the seller, based on this offer, this is what you're going to net. And if we decide to counter offer, then based on the counter offer, this is what you're going to get. So
Yeah.
we have to keep them informed. If you do this, this is what you'll get. If you do this, this is what you'll get. And I think if everybody does their part, then it makes that part of the equation a lot easier to kind of digest, I guess, for lack of a better word, so that everybody's kind of informed on what what needs to take place, because sometimes costs can vary between lenders, and underwriting and title search and all of the things that are necessary to close on a house. Those prices vary from person to person.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to kind of keep them informed of what that would be. If this is going to be your offer, this is how much you can expect closing costs to be. And if we change it, then this is what it's going to be. So
Yeah.
we try to keep everybody informed as well as what the lenders do. So there shouldn't be any surprises. We as agents, and I know you guys as lenders, we don't like surprises, because most of the time surprises do not go in our favor.
No.
And we want to try to prevent that as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Well, do you have any closing thoughts on the topic? And
I think what I would say is, as a realtor, I meet with each one of my clients. If it's a purchase, get them pre-qualified with your company, and just know, because what you look at is, how much they have down to put down, how much they have in the bank, what their current income is, what their debt ratio is, all those things you deal with that I don't. I normally just want to know what, based on your evaluation with your lender, what's your price point, and try to stay within that. I don't ever try to go over that, because I want people to be able to buy a home and be able to afford it, and not have to worry about from month to month if they can meet the house payment. It
right.
has happened before in the past with a lot of people, and I think we've all tried to streamline it to where that's less of a likely than in the past. And then once that's determined and we get to that point, then we have to do the normal inspection and go through the process there. In the meantime, they're getting documents to you and making sure they have everything, all their ducks in a row in that situation. A lot of people are more in tune of what to do nowadays than in the past. And I guess we can thank the internet for that. But we still have to make sure that everybody's on board every day, so that there are not any surprises in the end.
Yeah. Those are very good points. Very good points. Well, good deal. Well, if somebody has wants to get in touch with you to purchase a home this year, or just have a conversation about it, how can they do that, Ross?
You can get me at 205-601-0123. I have my phone with me all the time. I may be on the other line or something. If so, just leave a message. I'll be more than happy to call you back just as quick as I can. I don't usually turn my phone off till 10:30. So if you don't want to bother me for whatever reason, you're more than welcome to text, and I'll answer just as quick as I can. But that's how you can get in touch with me, and give them your numbers as well.
Yeah. So I can be reached at 205-979-4412 extension 1. That is my office number, and I'm happy to help out in any way that I can. And just, want to reiterate what Ross said just a little while ago. we don't like surprises. And so my goal is for there to be no surprises in a transaction, for you as a buyer to be educated from start to finish as to what your numbers are going to look like, what you should expect through the transaction, and how we can help you get from point A to point B and accomplish your goal of buying a home with as little stress as possible. That's what we want to do. So
Exactly. So
yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. I
Yeah.
appreciate your time as usual, and we'll get together next week to come up with another topic.
Sounds great. Thanks,
All
Ross.
right. Have a
All right,
good
have a
one.
great week.
All right.
Bye.
You too.